Everybody should have gotten that notification. Um, and yeah, as people are filtering in, I'm gonna introduce Anthony. Anthony is actually the first person to come to me to ask to give a seminar for this series. So that's, or to give a talk for this series. Make sure everybody's on the same page. This is the Bioconductor Developer Forum, where we try and have talks that are relevant to our community and to the infrastructure that supports it. Anthony is going to be talking about integrating AI assistance into IDEs, which I think we are all fairly interested in. Some of us have probably tried it. Most of us have certainly worked with AI assistants in our day-to-day work generally. So I'm hoping that this is going to be really topical. And please, Anthony, do you prefer that people ask questions during, or do you want them to save their questions for the end?
Um, I do have a lot of material, but yeah, I think it's fine. If you have a question in the middle, please feel free to ask. Or if you feel like you want to ask whatever you prefer, basically, it doesn't matter to me. So,
Okay. All right. Well, I would just
yeah.
ask that we use the raise hand feature in Zoom so that we're not recklessly interrupting. So, without further
Yeah.
ado, I'm going to mute myself and hand the floor over.
All right. Thank you very much, Nicholas. I'm going to share screen. Great. Okay. Yeah, as Nicholas mentioned, if you have any questions during the talk or comments, feel free to chime in. This is a pretty kind of new topic. So there's a lot of developments pretty much every day. So there's a lot of things changing. So hopefully there's nothing out of date in this deck of slides or in my little demo at the end. I put this together actually a month ago because I gave a workshop at HMS on basically incorporating these different AI tools inside your IDE, instead of, doing the classic copy pasting into a web browser, which is, kind of a thing of the past at this point. So I'll kind of be talking about the integration of basically having an LLM in your IDE. Um, and I'll share a lot of materials also. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to message me after too. I'm gonna share right now actually in the chat all the materials where you have the slides, the code, the demos, and a lot of stuff I won't go through today because this is only an hour and the workshop was put together for more than 2 hours. But yeah, in the chat I just put the link to all the materials. So, all right, without any further ado, so today, this is just the QR code to all the materials, to if you just want to use that instead of the link I put in the chat. I'll go through the slides, demo deck, to go through basically the background of incorporating AI assistance inside your IDE, and then I'll do a little live demo just to show how it looks in action. And obviously, this is not an exhaustive demo. It'll be just basically just to get you started if you haven't. And then, interestingly, yesterday at HMS, we had actually Phil Bauscher from Posit. And a lot of the functionality I'll be showing you today might actually end up being deprecated for a new AI assistant inside Positron. So, but this is still to be, uh, you know, it's a topic that still might develop into something else in the future. But yeah, so I'll just do a little 30-minute presentation and then a 15-minute demo. Yeah, if you have any question, let me know. So first, just to define what is vibe coding, because it sounds a bit like just a popular term. So it's a term that was coined by Andrej Karpathy in 2025, which is he's kind of a known figure in the LLM field. So it's the term to say we want to focus on the overall outcome or the vibe of coding rather than writing the syntax line by line. So the approach is we're going to prompt the AI to generate, debug, or iterate on the code we'll generate. And we're going to focus mostly on prototyping. So we're going to prioritize speed, creativity, just to test ideas more quickly than we could if we had to code everything manually. And then the role of the developer becomes, instead of, focusing on the micro, which is typing line by line every line of code, we're focusing more on the big picture, and more focusing on the big idea. And then after that, we can also do quality control on the code that was generated. So we get more of an orchestrator type of role instead of more of a micro, pure software engineering role. So also, this is just something to keep in mind is when we do AI coding is also just make sure that you remain strictly accountable for anything that is AI generated. So yes, it is a great productivity tool that can generate code and you can prototype ideas more quickly. But in the end, if you're going to share your code or make it part of a bigger software ecosystem like Bioconductor, you should always make sure that the AI generated code is valid and has good practice and is correct. So you shouldn't have any blind acceptance. Standards still apply, and of course, prototyping is not production, especially when it comes to, for example, Bioconductor. So again, this is something that Ludwig pointed me to, which is kind of a way to think about incorporating AI into coding. So cognitive offloading, which is good. There's a couple papers that came out in the literature about this. So you should kind of think of AI as the typist. Again, just kind of launch or prototype your ideas super quickly. And then what is bad or cognitive, which is cognitive surrender, is you think of the AI as the scientist or just trusting anything that the AI generates, including math or logic. Yeah, and also, of course, running code that you cannot read or explain. So you remain the pilot. And again, you should think of the AI assistant as a productivity tool, not as some a tool that basically does your job. Okay, so for the AI coding landscape, there's a lot of different players. So there's, of course, Cursor, which is kind of a standalone AI editor, and it's a good choice for a lot of power users because you have a lot of control. Um, and then there's GitHub Copilot, which is kind of the enterprise standard. This is the AI integration I'll be focusing on today because it's the simplest to integrate into the most popular IDEs, including Positron, RStudio, or VS Code. As I was mentioning, I was talking to Nicholas before we started the seminar, but you can pretty much access all the top models through GitHub Copilot. And on top of that, it also supports local or offline model for privacy. So if you're dealing with sensitive data, you can launch an Ollama model or the local instance, and then you can use that as the LLM backend when you're doing data science. Which is great. And then there's Continue also, which is an open source extension. So it's kind of the open source version of GitHub Copilot, and it can also connect to any custom or local AI model. We'll be focusing on GitHub Copilot, but just keep in mind there's way more options available to you. And of course, as things move so quickly in the field that, maybe another player will come um, in the landscape and be more popular than GitHub Copilot. And now in terms of the IDE choice in which we're going to incorporate GitHub Copilot, there's many choices. The three top ones that probably are most relevant for people here are probably VS Code, Positron, or RStudio. For anything R related, I used to be an R user. My background is statistics, so I grew up on RStudio. I used to dabble in VS Code when I had to pretty much just write a C++ backend to accelerate computation in some way. But now, thankfully, there's a really nice IDE for those who don't know, called Positron. I'm imagining that most people here are aware of it, which is basically a fork off of VS Code, but incorporates a lot of the nice features of RStudio. It basically has the best of both worlds. And on top of that, there is a very nice feature of Positron via the Positron Assistant that once you integrate the AI into Positron, it doesn't just have access to all your scripts. It actually also has access to your all the objects in your environment. So, for example, if you have a data frame and then you prompt the AI to modify your script, and it needs the context of the column names of your data frame, it can access it automatically. Whereas for VS Code, there is a way around it, but it's a little more complicated to do. But with Positron, it's a very nice feature that the AI, once integrated into your IDE, has access not only to all your files in your project, but also your variables in your environment. So, and then for RStudio, it used to be Copilot autocomplete only. But if you get the daily build, it actually has the AI assistant incorporated as part of it. But I'll be mostly focusing on Positron today. Um, so what is GitHub Copilot for those who don't know? So it basically used to be, ghost text completion or autocomplete. But now it incorporates a bunch of other integrated tools, including, of course, still code completion, except it's much better now. Because of, the AI models we have access to now are much, much better and improving every day, pretty much. There's also a Copilot chat. So once you integrate the Copilot chat in your IDE, it basically works like when you use a chat box in a browser, except it's much more convenient in that it has access to all the context of your project. So it can read, write, and have access to your variables and your environments directly without you having to copy paste or give it context. It has access to all the context naturally, which is very nice. And then of course there's agents which is a very nice feature which can modify your scripts via it can modify your scripts and it has context to do that via both your files and your environments. And
Um,
then of course with
Anthony, you have
yeah.
a question in the chat real fast about
Oh, yeah, of course.
Emacs and ESS.
Um, a lot of Arcado use Emacs, I guess. Um, I don't have too much experience with Emacs, but if somebody wants to chime in, they're more than welcome in the chat or speak up. I can pause for a minute or two. Yeah. I don't know if anybody here is a power user of Emacs. All right. Well, I guess I'll continue for now, but if anybody has any insights, feel free um, to comment on Parrot Sheet's question. Um, Yeah, so there's basically the three main features you have access through GitHub Copilot are code completion, chat, and agents. And I'll be demoing or talking about them right now, basically. Um, so um, so this is just if you've never seen it, I'm sure for those of you who have been using these AI tools inside your IDE, this doesn't look like anything new, but basically this is just basically the interface of GitHub Copilot inside Positron. So here, for example, you can see that I said explain what the, and then I used the hashtag notation and I said specifically the calculate log two fold change function does. And then you can see that it has context. So it looks at the files utils.r in which this function is. And then it basically has access to your script and it generates an answer. And then what's very nice about this is if there was a function inside calculate log two-fold change that used a function in another script, then the AI is very smart and it will look up the other script in which it has that internal function. So there is something called a smart search inside GitHub Copilot that it will basically use kind of like a mini RAG in which it will pull up all the functions and all the scripts that it needs to for your question or your prompt, and then it will provide the answer based on that. So the smart search kind of creates a mini RAG. It generates all the relevant scripts it needs to answer your question, including possibly data frames in your environment or even images in your environment, and then give you the answer. And then I'll go over more details, but here you can see that I am in the ask functionality. This is a Visual Studio Code screenshot, but it would be chats in Positron. And then here I selected the free model GPT 4.1. I don't recommend using that model, obviously, but it's one of the free ones. So, but yeah. And then, yeah, so the old way, which is not super convenient, is using a browser chat. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's obvious to everybody here. It's isolated. The idea has no idea what's on your computer. It requires constant copy and pasting of column names, your code, errors. It doesn't have access to the variables or the objects in your environment. And on top of that, it frequently hallucinates variable names because it lacks context. So this is just kind of a nightmare scenario that probably we've all been through, which is you need some assistant for coding somehow for one of the projects you're working on, and then you have to do the tedious job of copy pasting everything. And it still might not be enough because it doesn't have all the context, and it certainly doesn't have your data frames. Um, so using an ID integration is much better. So it's the AI lives inside your workspace. It automatically sees your open tabs, folders, highlighted text, or just any file in your project in general. And it writes code that perfectly matches your environment and variable names. So, which is a much more productive way to generate code or write your favorite or update your bioconductor package. So just as an example here, I said, for example, in one of my projects, how do I use the functions to summarize biomarker score by treatment group from biomarker CSV, and also add a box plot in live demo.r and read all the files and tell me. So instead of copy pasting this into your chat browser, it basically has smart search and it will look up all the files that it needs to basically do the task that you assigned it to through the prompt. So, which is very nice. So one thing to keep in mind is, obviously, I think everybody here who knows a little about LLM knows, what I mean when I talk about the context window of a model. So even though they have a big, there's a big context window. Even though there's a big context window, it doesn't mean that the AI is going to is going to have in its context all the files and every line of your in every script of your project. So even though AI has a huge memory or context window, feeding it thousands of files can cause hallucination and slow it down. So the solution that GitHub Copilot came up with, and I mentioned this earlier, is that it uses a smart search. So, for example, say in the prompt, fix this bug, and then it's going to basically kind of do a mini RAG where it's going to scan open tabs and all related files, and then curate all the scripts that it needs to do the task, whether it's an agentic task or just answering your question. So it's going to assemble all the relevant code snippets, and then it will generate the answer. So in GitHub Copilot, initially, there used to be a lot of hashtags and a lot of different notation you had to use to tag certain files or functions. But now with the smart search that is incorporated inside GitHub Copilot, you don't really need to do that. As you can see in the example I gave earlier, um, right, when I just mentioned the files, that is good enough, and the smart search is going to look up all the files that it needs to. So. And then just as another example here, the automatic search is incredibly smart, but sometimes it might need a hint, especially if you use one of the free models. So if it comes down that the AI is really not figuring out what scripts it needs to look at to do the agentic task or answer your question, you can always use the hashtag and then attach the specific file or function that you want to. That's a possibility. There's also the at uh, symbol that you can use. And for example, you can do at terminal, and then let's say you run code and then you get an error. And instead of um, copy pasting the error, you just say, look at the terminal. You can just do at terminal and then it will read the error. And then you can do an agentic task to fix or debug your code. If I had time, I would show you how to do this, but it is part of the demo if you want to, in the materials I shared earlier, if you want to check it out. So, okay, yeah, so I'm gonna not to spend too much time on this because I mentioned it earlier. So, there's kind of like three modes right now with the AI integration that you can use: chat, plan, and agent. So chat is basically, a context-aware chat browser inside your IDE. Agent, as you probably all know, is basically, it acts as a junior developer. It can autonomously edit multiple scripts, write code, run terminal commands. So it can not only write code, but it can actually test code. It will always ask you if it's allowed to run code, but it can also run code. So it's great for debugging. And then the plan mode is kind of a new development in the field of agentic coding, which for people who write a big data analysis or software project, it's often a good idea to kind of break down the project into different components. So what people often do now is they use a very, very good and advanced model to generate a plan for your software project or your complex data analysis. So for example, Claude Opus is probably the cutting edge model at this point. And then you can use Claude Opus to generate a very, very kind of detailed plan on how to implement your data analysis or your complex software project. And it will generate a markdown file that will basically contain the detailed plan and how to handle errors, what packages you should use, what is the approach for the implementation, et cetera, et cetera. And then once you have the plan, then you can execute the plan via an agent. And because some models are more expensive than others, what people often do is they use a kind of an expensive, slow model that is very good, like Opus, for example, to generate the plan. And then if the plan is very good, you can use one of the faster, cheaper models to implement. But I'll be talking about the kind of the pricing model for GitHub Copilot. So even for the good models, it's not you still have quite a bit of free premium requests via GitHub Copilot. So but yeah, I'll come back to that. Um, all right. As I mentioned before, GitHub doesn't just manage it might also manages your environment, not just your scripts. So it can automatically read console errors, and it can also autonomously use the terminal, and it can install packages and run scripts for you, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if it has to run scripts, it will always ask you. So, um, and then. Yep. As you when you use you go through the chat browser when you use a web browser with an LM, you have different sessions that have their different context windows. It's the same thing with having an LLM inside your IDE. So you can have multiple sessions for the same project, which is very nice because you can work on the different aspects of your project and have its own context window for that specific thing you're trying to fix. Um, so yeah. Um, and then there
Anthony,
are a lot. Yeah.
Anthony, there is a question in the chat which I think you can
Oh yeah.
comment.
How do you know this again? What do you mean by posit WB? Sorry, I'm not too familiar with that.
Posit workbench. So
Ah, workbench.
basically, like
Ah,
Phil showed
like it.
yesterday,
Yeah. For sure. So it's essentially the same thing. So if you're, for example, when you have GitHub Copilot, you get a license through your GitHub account. So if you go to the chat, excuse me, the link that I shared earlier, there's a github.io website that contains kind of instructions on how to get a GitHub Copilot license. Once you get your license, it's associated with your GitHub account. So then whether you're on a in Positron on a Posit Workbench or on your own laptop, as long as you connect your Positron session to your GitHub account, then you can access your GitHub Copilot um, um, license and you can use the features from GitHub Copilot.
did
So
you
in
did
a
you did
nutshell,
you Anthony, did
mhm.
you talk about GitHub education already?
I was going to do that towards the end because when I was going to switch
So
to the live demo,
Gotcha,
yeah.
got you. So I think like the main baseline is if you have an EDU email, you can sign up for GitHub Education and you get access to all these models through GitHub Copilot and then in Posit Workbench, no matter whether you use RStudio or Positron, you just open up Positron Assistant, select GitHub Copilot, and then the corresponding models as Anthony explained.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll be showing you a bit how to do that in just a second, but Yeah, like Ludwig is just mentioned, if you have an EDU account, whether you're a staff or professor or even a student, you basically get a 2-year license for free. And you basically don't have to pay the $10 per month to get a GitHub Copilot Pro license. But you still are somewhat limited in the amount of premium requests you can make once you have that license. But I'll go into more details shortly. So yeah, just going a little quicker here because I do want to get to the live demo. So there are a lot of kind of fancier things you can do to kind of instruct the AI to behave in a certain way or to not do certain things. So, for example, there's something called rules files. So, if you just want the AI to be more succinct, for example, and just get to the points without giving you long text, just for example, give you the code that you're asking for, you can generate an MD file inside this init folder and put all sorts of instructions inside this Copilot instruction markdown file. And then in every prompt that you make, these instructions in that markdown file will be included as part of your prompt automatically. So just to give you an example here, and you can see it in the GitHub link that I shared earlier. Inside the .github folder, I have a Copilot instructions markdown, and then I just give some example AI instructions. For example, output only the necessary code or direct answers, or for data privacy, never hard code sensitive information like password, API keys, or personal health information into scripts. Always assume data paths are in data and results, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can also apply specific rules that only apply to certain prompts. So for example, if you want certain rules to only apply when you're modifying R scripts, you can create these instruction files. So just to give an example here, and again, that's on the GitHub repo that I shared earlier. Inside the .github folder again, I have a subfolder called instructions, and then I have a markdown file called nice comments instructions. So for example, here it says always use clear, informative, and friendly comments in all R codes. Only apply it to R files, markdown files, or Quarto files. And then you can add all sorts of rules. I only put one rule here, but you can put way more. So for example, you can say never use base R plotting code, always use ggplot2, for example, or things like that. So that's something to keep in mind. And then, of course, you can also create agents. I don't know if I'll have time to show this today, but it's a very nice feature. There's an example in the GitHub repo if you want to look that up. But if you type create agent in the chat, you can basically create an agent that specializes in, for example, here, I need a R survival expert, and then you can say the R survival expert should only use certain packages, only use certain types of models, and specify all sorts of statistical specifications you want for your modeling approach. And then this will create an agent file. And now you can refer to this agent file whenever you want to call it when you're doing, for example, survival analysis in your project. So just as an example here, I have, again, inside the .github folder, I have an agent subfolder, and then I have one called R survival experts agent.md. And then you can specify all sorts of things for this expert. So, only use Kaplan-Meier or Cox, your serve miner, the package for plots, dplyr for data wrangling, always check non-NAs, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very simple example. You can make this markdown file a lot more complex and have way more regulations around how you want your survival analysis to be done. But the next time you want to do survival analysis and you want to do something in your project, you can just use @R survival agent, and it will basically include this inside the prompt. So now next time you do survival analysis, the AI is not going to, start doing some kind of bogus or some obscure type of modeling approach. It's constrained to what you've instructed it to. So. All right, kind of wrapping up soon here before I go to the live demo. But so here, another very nice feature, and that's very convenient, something that I use pretty much every day, which is I'm very bad at keeping track of Git commits. or what I did in every Git commit. So what you can do is inside Positron, stage the files you want, use this little magic commit button here, and then it will read the differences between the previously committed file and the new version you're trying to commit, and then generate a Git commit message for you based on the changes, which is very nice. So I've improved my Git commit messages a lot since I've been incorporating this into my workflow. So all right. Um, and then what's nice about GitHub Copilot, which I'll be showing today, but again, it's GitHub Copilot is not the only option, but with GitHub Copilot, it is very nice because once you get a pro license, you get access to pretty much all the top models through the drop-down menu, and you can also incorporate a local model. So if you launch a Llama model on your own laptop, you can access it. And so how does it work? So once you get a GitHub Copilot license and you have all the detailed instructions on the GitHub link that I shared earlier on how to get it if you have an EDU account, you basically bypass paying, I think it's $10 or $20 per month. You don't have to pay that anymore. And on top of that, you get 300 premium requests per month. So certain models, every premium request you make only costs one premium request. That's is if it has a 1x next to it. Um, if the model has 0.33x, it means that it has each premium request that you make only costs one third of one third premium requests. And then if it's 3x, it means, for example, Claude Opus, which is pretty much the cutting edge model at this point, every premium request counts for three. So if it's a 3x, it means that you could pretty much make 100 um, calls to premium requests to Claude Opus, and that it would exhaust your premium requests. Once you're past your quota, you're basically going to be charged 4 cents per premium request. So if you have 100 premium requests for Claude Opus, you would have a 12 cents surcharge because even though you just did one additional premium request over 100, you used Claude Opus and that counts for three. So just keep that in mind. And of course, you should always keep track of your premium request usage. So if you don't want to be charged at all in any of the months that you're using GitHub Copilot, just make sure you never go past 100%. All right. So in terms of picking the right model, I think I don't want to baby anyone here. I think everybody has their own preferences and everybody here has their own experience and preferences. But in general, I would say that if you do want to start incorporating GitHub Copilot in your daily workflow, a good strategy I find is to use Claude Haiku 4.5 because it handles 80% of everyday coding and debugging. I would say maybe even 90 or 95%. It's very fast and very, very good, and it only costs a third of a premium request. And then if you need to have a little more balance between intelligence and cost, then I would say Claude Sonnet or Gemini 3.1. Or for when if you use the plan mode, for example, where you need to generate a plan for a complex software project or data science or data analysis, a complex data analysis, and you need to generate a plan, I would say Claude Opus is probably what you want to go for. And then once you have a plan, then you can execute it with one of the cheaper models. That's generally a good strategy to go with. So. And then just a couple things for data security. So I was talking with Nicholas also before the workshop and or the seminar. And one thing you should keep in mind is there's two ways that data leaves your machine. First of all, there's data training. So this you can stop, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second because GitHub Copilot is actually very sneaky. That when you do get approved for your pro license, it automatically turns on to use your data for model training, and you can turn this off. However, once you do live inference, even though you've stopped model training, you cannot stop your data or your prompts to go to some data center if you don't use a local model. So keep in mind that there's nothing you can do about it. So if you have any kind of private data, you should not use GitHub Copilot or any cloud-based LLM. Obviously, if you have protected cloud information, personally identifiable info or restricted data sets, please make sure that you're not using GitHub Copilot with one of the cloud-based LLM. You're using a local model. So, and then in terms of disabling uh, model training, you basically just have to go to your GitHub accounts for which you've been giving a GitHub Pro license. And then from there, you can go to your settings and options. And then from there, you can, there's an option called allow GitHub to use my data for AI training, and then make sure that this is disabled. If you go to the link that I shared earlier in the chat, and I'll share it again for those of you who came a little later. Let's just put it back here. If you go to, or I'll share actually the GitHub, maybe this one is better. If you go to the pre-workshop setup, there's the instructions on how to turn this off. So, but again, keep in mind that just because you've turned off model training, your data, if you're using a cloud-based model, will still end up going to some data center. So there's nothing you can do about this unless you're using a local model. So all right, and then before I jump to the live demo, I'll try to do that in under 12 minutes, so I have at least 10 minutes for questions. But everything we're showing today is basically to modify your scripts. It has nothing to do with actually using AI to modify your objects. So there's a lot of very nice tools that are developing, and I'm sure that a lot of people here are familiar with it, especially if you're big on the R and bioconductor space. So there's a very nice package, for example, called Elmer, developed by Hadley Wickham, which is a package in which you can, if you provide an API, you can basically do natural language processing on your data frames, which is very nice. So you can, for example, have a data frame with a column that contains cell types. And then let's say that it's the cell type, it uses abbreviations and you want it to be more clear what exact cell type it is, not the abbreviation, then you can use Elmer to add another column to your data frame or your single cell experiment object as a call data, where it actually gives the full name of the cell type instead of just the abbreviation, which is very nice. So in a nutshell, you can use Elmer to do NLP on your data frames. You can use it to not just modify scripts, but actually do data science and modify your objects, which is very nice. So, all right, I'll jump to the live demo unless I can take a 2-minute questions here before I jump to the live demo, or I'm not sure what would be best at this point.
I think we
Yes,
can
one question.
go straight to the live demo. There's been some
Okay.
activity in chat, but I think we can wait for questions so afterwards.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So let me go to Positron now. Okay. Obviously the demo is supposed to be for much longer than 12 minutes or 11 minutes, but I'll try to do, I think I'll just go through the main functionality because right now it's all been a lot of theory and a lot of talking, but not so much showing. So in a nutshell, once you go through just to show here, this is the github.io website for the workshop that was put a month ago for the workshop at HMS, but it contains the instructions. So if you go to this page here into pre-workshop setup, and then you can basically follow these instructions exactly as it's put here, and you will end up with looking inside Positron, or there's also the instructions for VS Code or RStudio, but it'll end up looking like this. It might look a little different in your setup because I modified my ID to look like I like it to look. But here's my Positron assistant. And then here you can see this is where I can, for example, choose my model. So here you can see right now it's by default on GPT-5 Mini. And then for here, you can basically choose the different models you want to choose. And unfortunately, I think earlier this week, Opus was removed for some reason from GitHub Copilot as one of the available models, but it might come back. So hopefully it will. Yeah, so as you can see, you have Cloud 74.6, for example, you have Codex. if you like to use some of those models. And then here you have agent mode, ask mode, edits. So again, agent is to autonomously edit your files. Ask is basically a context-aware chat browser inside your IDE. And then edit is pretty much the same thing as agents. Um, and in fact, if you incorporate VS Code inside Visual Studio, there's only agent, there's no edit, but essentially agent and edit are the same. And then of course there's plan, which it can be used to generate this kind of markdown file to plan your project, whether it's a software project or a complex data analysis you want to do, you can use plan, the plan mode here. And okay, so let me do a little example here. So here also, as you can see, also just before I give an example, here you can see that if I zoom in a little bit, you can see it has my R 4.52 as my session. So if I have in my environment a variable called, well, let me give you an example right now. So let's just say that I do in my console, X is 1 through 5, right? And then I say what is contained in my variable X, right? Um, okay, let me try here. Okay. Uh, Very strange. Give me a second here. Not sure why this is not working. Let me try haiku. All right, there we go. Sorry about the little hiccup. Sometimes some of the free models are just not working very well because there's a high demand because they're free. But I use the haiku model, which is not free, or it costs some premium requests. And as you can see, it says your variable X contains integers 1 through 5. So as you can see that because it contains um, my variables, my R console session, anything that I have in this session will be included as part of is potentially included as part of the context, depending on the smart search. And then if I launch, for example, another session here, so let's say I have another Python project. So I'm going to launch Python here. And then you're going to see here that in my as you can see here, now you have the Python conda environment included as potentially part of the context that will be included as part of the prompt, which is very nice. So if you switch back and forth between R and Python, if you have, for example, spatial transcriptomics images in Python, you can actually prompt the AI to ask a question or modify the object or your spatial data object, which I've tried, which is very nice. And then you can switch back to your R session to do your statistical analysis back and forth. And always have your variables in your environment attached as potentially part of the context when you're prompting DAI, which is a very nice feature. So, okay. Let me, for example, here now say, uh, let's see, what can I show in 5 minutes that would be very nice. So I'm going to uh, let's see. Um, okay, so I'm going to, for example, I have a CSV file that contains survival data, and then I can prompt the AI. So let me go back to my R session here, and then I can say, for example, and I'm going to zoom in here. What are the column names in this CSV file? What are the unique values inside biomarker status and treatment and arm and columns? So I'm just going to ask that as an example. And then, as you can see, it has to actually run some codes um, to actually look it up. So I'm going to allow it. And uh, sorry about that. Let me change this. Okay, this is a very strange behavior. This is the first time I get this, and it happens during a live demo. Sorry about that. Yeah, let's see if I use the hashtag, it works. Okay, so for some reason, the smart search should have been able to open up TCGA clinicaltrial.csv on its own and read it, but for some reason I had to actually attach it. I'm not sure why. Usually it works without doing it, but as you can see, it actually read it, so that's great. And then now I can say, for example, do kind of phase three if you go through the code in the GitHub repo that I provided. So we're going to do some data wrangling here. So we're going to filter out NA rows and also modify or create a column for months for survival days, because right now it's given in days. And I'm going to go to agent mode for that. And then I'm going to just specify, write the code in phase three. And then I just want to show you basically in the last few minutes what it's going to look like. Um, okay. Great. The pleasures of doing a live demo. Okay. All right. And then I basically want to show you that once you do that, okay. For some reason, GitHub Copilot is not behaving as it should. What should have happened is that it modifies the script here. I'm not sure why it's behaving strangely. Let me try to switch to VS Code to see if it works there. Um, okay. And then, okay. I believe it's doing what it should right now. There we go. So for some reason, GitHub Positron was acting up a little strangely. They are updating the Positron assistant in Positron, so maybe there's kind of an update that screwed things over. But in a nutshell, here you can see now that via the agent mode, it's doing the data wrangling here as I instructed it, and I get a keep button. So it's going to add the code to do data wrangling, and then I can choose to keep it or go back. And then what's very nice is I can go back to any edit that I did as if it was GitHub, as if it was like a Git commit. So if I, for example, go to start over, it'll take me to the code before that modification here. So if I were to click start over, it would go back. So anyways, all that to say that don't be afraid to try it in Positron. I think there was an update recently to the Positron AI assistants because they are coming up with a new AI assistant, and maybe they deprecated some of the features here, but just play around with it, get familiar with it. There's a lot of fancy things you can do. Please try to create agents inside the live demo here. There's a lot of instructions and things that I kind of explain on you should try to, for example, write an R script and then write an agent to modify it and create a Python equivalent from dplyr to Python. And yeah, there's a lot of materials on there, but I'm kind of running out of time here. And apologies for the little hiccups, but I think I'll take the last 10 minutes for questions. I think I'll leave it at there at that. So yeah.
All right, that was a really wonderful demo and a great talk. I think most of us here have probably experienced our own issues with live coding demos, so don't feel bad about that at all. Um, but I guess I will start off um, with something fairly simple. Where do you think these agents really shine the most for you?
For sure. So in one of the demos for this workshop, I create a script to do data wrangling in R using dplyr. And then after that, I want to see, can I, for example, if I want to work in Python for the same project because I need to go back and forth between the two because maybe there's some packages in the SCVerse I want to use. Oftentimes, I want to replicate, for example, the data wrangling that I did in R in Python. So just as an example of a use case is I create an agent, which is going to be very specific as to when I want to, for example, translate R code into Python code. I wanted to use specific packages or functions to replicate the R code into Python. And then if you define an agent to operate within these boundaries, it actually works very, very well, and it saves you from doing a lot of back and forths. So using these agent tools is pretty much a productivity tool, but it doesn't become very productive if you have to iterate many, many times and go back and forth. You probably would have saved more time just writing it yourself at that point. So if you just have an agent that has specific guidelines on how to operate, for example, translating R code to Python, it can save you a lot of time if you do a lot of that. So I would say that's my experience, but of course I'm not, I'm sure there's other use cases. If anybody wants to chime in, I'm sure there's other cases where they found that agents are very useful. But yeah, this is an example that comes to mind when I use it. So
Sure. So I think now, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to hop in. Let's try not to talk over each other while we're doing it.
yeah, so here it's not a local. The local here has nothing to do with actually using a local model. This is for Parikh Sheep Nanda's question. So if you do want to launch a local model, click here where you have the drop-down menu for local model. Click Manage Models. And then if you have a Llama model launched locally, then you'll have, the URL here appearing, and then you can select that model. So that's one way to do it. So in fact, it is the easiest way to do it. So yeah. Um, and then let's see. Yeah. Yeah, feel free to speak up if you have any questions or comments. So yeah, so that's a great question. From uh I'm sorry, I lost it. One second. I think I saw somebody ask if there's any advice on, yeah, so how not to use all your tokens by 10 a.m. So that's a great question. Um, so I would say that one way would be to, so for example, when I use the git commits, right, where I just have the staged file and the file I'm trying to commit, I just use a free model to generate the git commit message, right? So you don't need a fancy model to generate git commit messages. Um, and then if it's also routine coding tasks, even the Haiku model might be a bit of an overshoot. You can maybe use one of the cheaper models to do a bit of tidying of your code. So for example, going from the deprecated dplyr piping operator to the newer one. You can use one of the free models for that. It becomes tricky when it's, more advanced coding tasks. I would say to maybe also define a lot of rules files so you don't go back and forth with the AI. to, say, no, actually what I wanted to say is, and then going back and forth. So if you have a lot of instruction files, that saves you a lot of premium requests because you don't need to go back and forth um, with the AI. But in general, there's no free lunch. If you do, you know, code heavily, like I'm sure you do, and I do a lot, then it's tough not to basically use all your premium requests in one morning. But yeah, so and then let's see. Thoughts on Claude's model performance drop? Um, and So I can't really comment on that. I tend to definitely like Claude Sonnet for coding, and even Haiku in general is pretty good. But some people also vouch by Codex. And then um, something else I wanted to mention also for in terms of using your premium costs is um, one other tip to not use all your premium requests in one morning is you can really go all in for just one premium request. So in one premium request, you can say implement all of this functionality, test it and debug it, and run it until the code works. So it might run for 20, 30 minutes while it's writing code and debugging and going back and forth between writing code and testing it. All of that still counts as just one premium request. So keep that in mind. Whereas if you just select one line of code and say change it to this line, that's also one premium request. So I would say one trick to really maximize your usage is to just really try to go all in with every single premium request you ask. So not only to generate the code if you're in agent mode, but also test it and debug it. So yeah. Um, I have not tried OpenClaw in my projects. If anybody has used it, feel free to speak up, but I have not personally used it. Um, so yeah. Certainly gonna scroll through the questions here. Um, um,
I think with the sort of drop off in questions and the approaching hour, I think I'm gonna cut the recording here. I'm also on borrowed time at the conference center, and I'm gonna be asked to be leaving soon. But
for
thank
sure. Yeah.
you, Anthony, for the talk. It was great. I was really excited to see you do the live coding demo. I'm always happy when people are brave enough to try that. Um, and yeah, thank you everybody for attending. I'm going to stop the recording shortly and then close the meeting. But yeah, we will be doing this again next month. The meeting for next month should already be on the Develop Forum website, and we will be scheduling further into the summer soon. So if you have something you want to do, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks for coming. Bye-bye.